So how many of you at some point in your life took some Latin? That's pretty good. That's about a third, I'd say. How many took some Greek? Ho! One. Yes. How many of you have been to Rome? Oh, the majority.
That's good. All right.
How many of you, now we get serious, how many of you think the United States is in real trouble and maybe circling the drain? For those who are streaming, it's a very large supermajority. All right. How many of you think, in spite of that, we will somehow, as we always do, trudge and struggle through this to the other side? Not bad, right? So that really helps you think about our audience. And so, first of all, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's very different from San Diego, and I very much appreciate that.
So, Thoreau says in Walden, how many a man has dated the new era of his life from the reading of a book? One of my favorite sentences in Thoreau. Your book, Mortal Republic, 2018, I ordered immediately because I'm fascinated by this subject. I was kind of a minor classicist at the University of Minnesota in Oxford. I struggled my way through Homer in the original Greek, and I have scars to show. But it was one of the great experiences of my life. And I'm fascinated by the Roman Republic because the founding fathers were so deeply fascinated by it. And then I read this book, which came out just before the pandemic, and you and I have been in a couple of conversations by Zoom. This is the first time we've been in the same room. I'm so eager to hear from you. And just let me set this up, Ed, by saying a few words about the founding fathers. I mean, they were so self-consciously in the world of the Roman Republic that it's amazing. For example, we have a capital.
Yep.
We have a Senate. A president can veto. We have legislation. We have jurisprudence, and on and on and on. We take our literary vocabulary largely from Greece, drama, tragedy, epic, ode, but we take our political vocabulary largely from Rome. And the founding fathers, it's a long story, but Greece wasn't really a big factor in the founding because it was still under Turkish control, and Lord Byron was about to do what he did, and
And it's complicated because those Greeks called themselves Romans.
Right.
Because they were.
So there's that. In Washington, D.C., we renamed the Goose Creek the Tiber, which seemed a little much if you think about it. And there was a famous statue, which we'll show you in a little while, of George Washington as Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus is a huge figure in the founding. The Cincinnatus is the man who was in retirement. There was an emergency, 478 BCE.
It's in the 460s.
And he was called out of retirement.
Yeah, no, and I think Cincinnatus is the prototype. We actually talked about Cincinnatus this afternoon. I think when you talk about citizenship, Cincinnatus is the place you start.
He comes out of retirement in 16 days. He wins the war. He immediately goes home, retires. He became the idea of what a real American statesman would be. And George Washington was regarded as the American Cincinnatus, was the first president of the Society of the Cincinnati, which still exists in Washington, D.C. And when Jefferson was asked to help get a magnificent statue of Washington for the rotunda at Richmond in Virginia, there was a huge debate in America about whether Washington should appear in a toga or contemporary costume. And it went back and forth, and then finally Jefferson said, come on, enough already on the Roman thing. So it's one of the great statues in America. But you see, and then if you think, this is a darker part of this, Ed, but slaveholders named their enslaved people with names like Cato and Jupiter and so on. And how heartless, really, to use classical names and mythologies to name people that you own and don't even allow them to have their own names, and usually one name only, as in Jupiter or York. So that's another side of this. It just goes on. And in the newspaper wars of the 1790s, people would write their published essays, but they wouldn't say this was written by Alexander Hamilton or James Madison. They used Roman names. Publius was the main one, Fabians, all these names that come from Rome. And so they were obsessed with this. And the question, America has made kind of a cottage industry ever since about asking ourselves, are we Rome? Are we going to go the way Rome did? I don't think the Canadians ask whether they're Rome. I don't think that the people of Finland ask whether they're Rome, right? This is an American thing.
Yeah.
So you get the historical background of this, and the book that helped shape the American constitutional system more than any other was written by a Frenchman, Montesquieu, The Spirit of the Laws. But he was working from Polybius in the ancient world, and so we designed our system to be kind of a modern Roman Republic that would never die. And ever since then, we've been worrying about, will it die? So here's my question. Are we Rome? Have at it.
So I'll start with this image, because I think this image looks surprisingly like something that could come from us, but this image is almost 2,100 years old. This coin was actually issued by Brutus, the assassin of Julius Caesar. And if you look at that front of that coin, it says libertas on the side, just like our coins say liberty on the side. You could mistake this for a nickel if you didn't look too closely at it. And this, I think, suggests that these connections that Clay evokes are very real. But I think what's interesting to me is there's actually two levels to this, because there have been two stories of Rome that have been the American story. One is the story of the founders, which is the Rome of the Republic, and the Rome of Montesquieu, and the Rome of a wonderful representative democracy where citizenship was shared by all, and the elections that were held conveyed the thoughts of all of those people and generated policy that everyone who was a member of this polity could support. But then, at the same time the American Revolution is happening, there's a different version of Rome that's written by a man named Edward Gibbon. In Edward Gibbon's Rome, the peak is not the Republic, the peak is the empire. And so for the founders, was America Rome? The Rome they're talking about is the 1st century BC Roman Republic. But as time passes, and especially as you get into the 20th century, the model that people turn to was Gibbon's Rome, the empire. This powerful state that projected its authority and its military genius and its capacity to change the world. This is the Rome we looked at in the 20th century. And when I started teaching in 2002, that's the Rome my students looked at as the Rome that we were connected to, right? I mean, you might remember the book by Cullen Murphy that is basically this, Are We Rome? And what Murphy is writing about is not the Republic. What he's writing about is the empire. And he's writing in the context of the lead up to the Iraq War and this question of, is the United States overstretching itself? Right around 2017, right around when I started working on Mortal Republic, I could see my students' perspective change. The first 15 years I taught, the Rome they wanted to talk about is Gibbon. And there were reasons to use Gibbon as a way to understand America up to that point. And around 2017, and I remember, we were talking about this last night, I remember standing in front of my class and talking about a moment in the 120s BC where Rome has its first roundup of Italian immigrants who are illegally in the city. And I'm talking about this on the day that the travel ban came down. And I've talked about this, I've taught that course 15 times by that point. No one has ever even...
So the travel ban is happening in the first Trump
administration? The travel ban is happening in the first Trump administration. And I give this, and it's an aside, it's a one-sentence mention. Oh, and by the way, in 125, Rome conducted this first roundup of Italian immigrants and expelled them from the city. We had a 20-minute discussion of it, because my students had all of a sudden decided the Republic isn't something that we study because it's interesting. We study it because it's immediately relevant to us. Because the world we live in, all of a sudden, it's not the Antonine Age. It's not the empire. It's not this powerful Rome projecting its authority around the world. It's the Republic, and the Republic as it walked towards its failure.
So let me ask you a question just to try to see if I got you right. So the founders were obsessed with the Republic. But Gibbon writes his book in 1776, so it comes a little bit too late for the founders. And then up through, say, World War II with the Truman Doctrine and with the Marshall Plan and so on, the United States is really thinking in terms of the Roman Empire. The Republic we just take for granted, that it's just fine. But coming around 2017, it shifts back into, the Republic is not as solid as we thought it was. What's going to happen here? Is that fair?
That's correct. I think what the founders did is they set out a project saying, let's Let's build this thing Montesquieu theorized based on a Roman model. Let's use our classical education. And there's, when we look at like what Hamilton is reading at Princeton, we know
he
what
read books?
Oh my God, yeah.
I thought it was just
shockingly he did.
Okay.
It's not in the musical, but he's reading Sallust, he's reading Livy, he's reading Cicero.
He took a shot.
Yeah, no, they should have sung that. It would have been great. No, but you look at what he's reading, and he's reading about these wonderful, very expressive, incredibly eloquent authors talking about what it's like to live in a republic as it fails. And this is the curriculum of the founders. But of course, when Gibbon starts his project in 1776, they're grown-ups. And they're actually applying these lessons and building something with it. And when Gibbon finishes the French Revolution, Gibbon finishes basically at roughly the time the French Revolution overthrows the entire political order of Europe, that Gibbon was sort of thinking, well, Rome kind of gives us a model to understand our world in this Europe of balanced monarchies where everybody is running their monarchy well. And by the time Gibbon finishes his work, that doesn't exist anymore. And so Gibbon comes back as a story, not as a political theory. But as the United States moves into this mode of projecting power, there is this sort of question about, are we going too far, right? Our republic is stable. Our republic is sound. The founders succeeded. And so in the aftermath of World War II especially, we now look different. We now look like this established power. And what happens to established powers? They either maintain their power or they lose it. And Rome shows you what happens when they lose it. And you look at some of the stuff that's written in the 1960s. Ronald Reagan gives a wonderful, an interesting speech where he compares the experience of being governor of California in the 60s to the experience of Rome in the later part of the second and early third centuries. Because this is on the mind of people in the United States, right? What happens to us? Not if we lose our republic. It's a given. We won't lose our republic. What happens to us if we lose our empire, if we lose our power? Right. And in 2017, almost like a light bulb, that idea that our republic could last forever, it just goes away. And it was with my students first. That was what was alarming, right? It's 18 to 22-year-olds. And they're the ones who saw this. Before I even saw that the conversation had changed, they saw it. And that really prompted a very serious question in my mind. How can we avoid the mistakes the Romans made? Even though we aren't Rome, we rhyme. And how can we avoid falling into the same complacency that Romans did that led to the end of their republic?
Okay, so thank you for that. I'm asking a tough question because I'm going to ask you to be briefer than you can possibly be. Anyone, and by the way, here's his latest book.
I don't do brevity all that
It reads like a novel. Actually, it reads like a Dickens novel. It's so big. and only a portion of it was published. So amazing achievement, just a truly amazing achievement. And we're so pleased. And some copies are available here. You can, of course, get them at the local bookstore or order them and so on. So in a very short compass, my friend, why did Rome, the Republic, fail? What happened that the Republic, which begins in 509 BCE, come apart in the second and first centuries BC?
Very quickly, complacency. And that complacency led people to assume that they could do things that they knew were harmful to the Republic and get away with them because it actually wouldn't undermine the structure so much. And the biggest thing they try to get away with is using violence in politics.
Political violence in the streets.
Political violence, yes. And it starts small, right? For 300 years, no one is killed in political violence in Rome. Between the 430s
which is amazing if you think about it.
Yes. 300 years. And when violence comes back, it's used initially on a relatively small level. Within 50 years, there's a civil war where tens of thousands of Romans are killed, and the war ends with the mass execution of 6,000 Roman citizens by other Roman citizens in public while the Senate listened. Complacency can do that.
But once you open the door to political violence, that door swings open. It's hard to close it again.
And the thing that's remarkable about it is we have Romans, and Cicero is a very eloquent person for this, who say, putting violence in our republic is deadly to the republic. But Cicero himself says, unless it's somebody who I think is dangerous. And that's complacency, right? If you actually believe that violence undermines a republic, you never condone it ever. It doesn't matter how bad the person is. And this is something of all people Julius Caesar said. He said, you cannot use violence against fellow citizens without trying them and convicting them in a court, because once you start, it doesn't stop. And Caesar knew that, but Cicero didn't. Even though Cicero says the right thing, in practice, Cicero believed, well, the republic is strong enough that like just this once, it won't matter. There is no justice once.
So complacency. Is it also possible that Rome created its constitution, unwritten, when it was a little city-state, and as it expanded first in the region and then through Italy and then beyond, is it possible that they attempted to stretch an instrument that really belonged to a city-state into something that could no longer be contained within that model?
I would say no, because I think what's a genius thing about the Roman process of building a republic is they extended citizenship as their state expanded, and they came up with ways for their new citizens to participate in the state. And this is why I think the republic was particularly attractive to the founding fathers of a country that is basically strung along the lowlands east of the Appalachian Mountains, but looking to come to San Diego. Aren't we all? And looking to come to Vail and looking to come to all of these wonderful places, because how do you build a polity that is that big and is also functional? And Rome did, because what Rome was willing to do and other ancient states were not willing to do is extend citizenship to anybody who had something positive to contribute, and not only extend citizenship, but figure out how you could take advantage of those contributions to make the society better. And so this is, I think, the thing about the Republic that we miss, right? This is an incredibly flexible institution that the Romans built that nobody in the ancient world matched. Athens could not do this. It just intellectually could not extend citizenship to large numbers of people. Sparta collapsed because its citizen body collapsed. It couldn't expand its citizen body at all. It shrank. Most ancient states did not extend citizenship to people they conquered. Rome not only did, but it allowed those people they conquered to become senators, to become leaders. They're emperors from all over the place. Once the empire starts, the first emperors are from Italy, but by the time you get a century in, they're emperors from Spain, from southern France, from North Africa, from Syria. They're emperors from everywhere, because the idea was, all of these people are Romans. It doesn't matter where you come from. Citizenship expansion allows you to become a member of this community in full standing, able to contribute whatever it is that you can contribute. And so this is, I think, a model that is really attractive to the founding fathers, because Rome is able to grow out from a tiny city-state in a really marginal part of the Mediterranean to something that, if we want to show the slide, controls territory. So this is the Roman Empire at its peak. And if you show the next slide, that's how big it was. It's the size of the continental United States. There's 60 million people living in this. 60 million Roman citizens living in a polity without phones, without the internet, without trains, without airplanes, right? This could easily fall apart. It can take easily 20 days for a message to get from Egypt to Rome, one way. Right? So if you have a question and you're the governor of Alexandria, you send that message to Rome, you'll hear back in a month and a half. And it works. And it works because these people are participants.
And how did they hold this far-flung empire together? Roads. They're incredible engineers. They built these roads, and those roads are often on the very path that later roads have followed. They had 55,000 miles of roads in Europe because they wanted to get people from point A to point B in the fastest possible time, to be able to take military commands, to be able to do trade. And they realized you can't connect so much land unless you create an infrastructure, and they were brilliant at it, even with their low technologies.
And their port systems and their naval exchange and their naval sort of movement is equally good. And so you get these cities. The city of Rome is an incredibly cosmopolitan place in the first century, Because all of these Roman citizens from everywhere are coming there and settling there, and they are allowed to practice their religion as they inherited their religion. We have a wonderful text written by a Jewish scholar from Alexandria who says, the Emperor Augustus said that Jews can be Roman citizens and still be Jews. They can practice their rights. They can practice their religion. They don't have to do anything that is separate from the way they have been raised. Their Roman citizenship is an addition. It's an addition for us as Romans, and it's an addition to them as Jews. But this, the trade and the ability to move around this empire, it brings that citizen body even closer together because you create these cosmopolitan spaces where everybody is Roman, but everybody is also something else. And so you learn that this project works. Because you're living in it, and you're watching it, and you're understanding it.
Okay, you say complacency, and that's not going to be enough for us. So you're going to have to go farther than that. So I want you to talk a little bit about the Roman concept of virtue, because one of the things that's happening now in the United States is that norms are being trampled upon. And in all constitutional societies, you have what is written down in code that we must do. There will be an election every 4 years and so on. The House will be in 2-year cycles, the Senate in 6, and so on, the Electoral College. But these things depend upon virtue, not so much Christian concepts of virtue, but virtue. What did virtue mean to Romans?
So I think there's a couple of ways that I would answer that question. The first is that I think Romans have a very different idea of what it means to function in this world than we do. And by that I mean, you are a member of a family where you're renting your family name for this generation. And you need to leave your family at least as good and ideally better than you got it. Your kids should be better positioned than you are. And you as a citizen are renting that position as a citizen.
In trust.
In trust. So this is something built by people who came before you, and it is your obligation to give it to the people that come after you in better condition than you got it. And so I think that this is fundamentally where that virtue comes from, right? You have a larger obligation than what you want to do. And so in Virgil's Aeneid, there's a wonderful scene where Aeneas is in Carthage with the Carthaginian queen Dido.
Falls in love with Dido.
And he loves it, right? He wants to stay. And the gods come to him and say, it doesn't really matter what you want to do.
That's not your mission.
You have a destiny. That destiny is to found Rome. We understand, she's beautiful. It's wonderful there. The climate is great. You need to leave.
And he abandons her, and she doesn't take it very well.
And that's virtue. We wouldn't see that as virtue, right? That we would at the very least say, well, that's a complexity, right?
Or he's a cad with respect to Dido.
Yeah, you do harm on a personal level, but maybe, it's not Aeneas who founds Rome. Aeneas founds the city that Rome is ultimately founded from, right? Maybe that's worthwhile in our conception. There's no question in the Roman conception. There is no question. If you stay with Dido, you are choosing yourself and you're breaking all of those bonds to your society and to your family that you are entrusted to maintain. And you don't have the right to do that. And that's virtue for the Romans, right? This understanding that you are a part of a society and you need to make that society better by behaving in a very specific set of ways. And when that society asks you to do something, you do it. And you do it not because you want to, but because, like Cincinnatus, you were asked to do it. And you do it to the best of your ability, and you hope it works out.
You have Commonwealth duties and Commonwealth responsibilities that sometimes don't match your personal self-aggrandizement or your personal ambitions. And until you can see beyond your personal ambition to a larger good for Rome, you are failing the test of virtue.
Yeah.
And when it starts to come apart in the 2nd century, people begin to violate that norm.
And it's complicated because what the biggest problem that happens in the 2nd century. So I'll give one of my favorite examples that nobody has ever heard of. It's a man named Fabricius. So
Who is it?
Fabricius. So in 280 BC, one of the relatives of Alexander the Great invades southern Italy. His name is Pyrrhus of Epirus. And the Romans confront him. He has elephants. They've never seen elephants. So imagine what an elephant looks like to somebody who has never seen them, right? Imagine something the size of a garbage truck moving, and you've never seen anything like that. And you have to fight it because it's coming to kill you. So the Romans lose the battle. But Pyrrhus sends an emissary to Rome and scouts out the person that he's going to be negotiating with. And it's Fabricius, who's a renowned person, but not a wealthy person. So Pyrrhus tries to bribe him. And Fabricius says to him, I can't take your money because everybody in Rome will know how I got it. And whatever material advantage I might get from that, the damage it will do to my family and my heirs can never be offset by anything you give me. That's virtue.
And there are cases in Livy and elsewhere where someone has his own son killed because his son has violated the code, or somebody is easily going to escape and get back to Rome but chooses to stay because it would be unfair for him to leave. And these things get promulgated again and again as that's what it is to be a Roman. That's what a Roman is.
And what happens in the 2nd century is this gets muddled, in large part because Rome gets very wealthy very quickly in a private sense. And so what you have are people who become very wealthy. Basically, they're financiers who become very wealthy in a fashion that isn't involving, making things. It's about creating, financial instruments. And so this destabilizes people's faith in the Republic. And those people are not exactly behaving without virtue. They're not breaking any laws. But people who are not wealthy like them start asking why it is that this is okay. And the question of virtue then becomes muddled, right? Do we do what's right for everybody, even though we haven't done anything wrong, and it's maybe not right for us? Or do we fight to keep what we feel we have earned? And so this is a gray area that ultimately people who decide to not behave virtuously capitalize upon to generate first anger and then violence. And this is how the violence comes in. It's not that all Romans abandon virtue. It's that you enter an area where it's not clear what that virtue is anymore. And the ability to sort of piece out what is virtuous in that moment, the Romans struggle to do that, and it takes too long. And eventually, people who really are not going to behave virtuously use the anger generated by this wealth inequality to ultimately, bring Rome into this culture of violence. And once that violence is there, people begin to tolerate the violence, but also they begin to say to themselves, it's my family's legacy to win these elections. My ancestors have won these elections. I want to win this election. I can't win this election by just running a good campaign. I have to run this election by having thugs come out because this other guy is going to use thugs too. I can't uphold my family's legacy without doing something violent. And is that virtue? They would say yes. Most Romans would say no. But people like Cicero would say maybe. Right? And that's where this erodes. And this is where the complacency is, because the check on that is to say, you are going to destroy our republic if you behave this way. But even the Romans who say that, they don't really seem to believe it, because they also make these compromises.
All right, are we Rome? So number one, complacency, political violence, an erosion of the concept of virtue or conflicting ideas of how virtue should operate, then ambition getting in the way of the peaceful transfer of power and the electoral process. So I ask you again, are we Rome? That's why they're here.
So I will answer this. I will deflect this question in a way that I hope is artful, but I'll confess this. So my son wants to go into politics. The historian Sallust, who is my favorite Latin author of all time.
Give us his dates.
So Sallust is a 1st century BC author. He's active in exactly the same moment as Cicero, exactly the same moment as Caesar. He's actually an associate.
So he's
of Julius
reporting
Caesar.
this.
So he's
collapse.
reporting at the moment everything is falling apart. And what Sallust says is, I entered politics with all of the best intentions as a virtuous young man, but the political culture was so rotten, it was impossible to maintain my virtue, and I became corrupted too. And Sallust says, I ultimately retired from politics and I'm writing history just so that I can provide an example so everybody else can sort this out. And as the father of a son who wants to go into politics, I am deathly afraid that Sallust's question and Sallust's story might be ours. because I do not want my son to become Sallust.
So I'm trying to imagine your household.
He's
You're
gonna kill me
you're in
for
your
this, by
son's
the way.
room, you're saying, son, we should talk about Sallust. And I mean, how does he respond to this sort of erudition?
His response is, it's not like that. And I hope he's right. I really do hope he's right, but I worry.
You mentioned luxury. For people like Jefferson, their concept of what happened in Rome included political violence and so on. I don't think they would have said complacency. But Jefferson believed that once Macedon was taken in 146 BC and the great wealth started to really pour into Rome, that suddenly you were no longer a nation of sturdy family farmers who were living close to the land, and those same farmers would fight the wars during the off-season and so on. And now suddenly it's luxury and everyone wants wealth and everyone wants comfort. And now you begin to find other mercenaries or other people that will fight your wars. And for Jefferson, this was the death knell of the Republic, luxury. Of course, he lived in great luxury, so that's a bit of a paradox. But you take my point. That was an orthodoxy of the Founding Fathers, that luxury will kill America. And if that's true, of course, Vail's in some trouble.
So San Diego. So I think that the answer to that is Jefferson did not understand how the economy is working in the 2nd century at all.
Or I think in America.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, and I think the American economy only matches the sophistication of the Roman financial economy in the 20th century. You know, some of the stuff that you see happen in the 19th century when the US is on the gold standard and we have deflation because we cannot create enough money to, match the supply of money to the supply of goods. This didn't happen in Rome because Rome had a financial sector that was very sophisticated, much more sophisticated than what we had in the 19th century. And so the money that's there in the 2nd century, it's not land and physical stuff. It's bonds. It's financial instruments. It's 2008 level sort of stuff that they are building. It's very sophisticated. And so these people are very, very rich, but not in the way Jefferson imagined, and not in the way that most historians imagined, because frankly, they didn't understand either. Historians, we are not economists, and we do our best, but historians in Rome, just like historians now, struggle to explain, what a securitized debt instrument is, for example.
All right, so your book 2018, Mortal Republic, which I so highly recommend for everybody. Murphy's book was Are We Rome? That was 2007. That's more about the empire and overreach. And then Tom Holland's book, Rubicon, is 2003. And leaving Murphy's book out, when I read Tom Holland's book, and then I read, I think, a more important book, yours, I'm reading about Caesar and Pompey and Crassus and Clodius and, the whole story. And about every 10 pages, I would look up and say, is he talking about Rome or is he talking about us? And so you did this strategically, I think, carefully, cautiously. But so they want to know, are we Rome? And if we're not Rome, is there anything we can learn from Rome in our current crisis?
And I think the reason that I wrote the book that way is because I think that what the past can show us are possibilities for the future. Romans would believe that. Romans would advocate that point very strongly. But I think that point really needs to be emphasized because, especially as Americans, our history is frankly not as long as Roman history. It's not as long as European history. And that gives us a very limited range of possible outcomes when we see things happen. I mean, what can we look at as the worst catastrophe? The Civil War, right? That is a terrible political catastrophe in the United States, but it is, in a sense, a kind of singular political catastrophe for us. What Rome shows is lots of different ways that wealth inequality and political dysfunction and complacency can add up to real problems, but also Rome can show us how those problems play out when the leadership deep in their heart wants the republic to survive, but makes choices that are short-sighted that undermine that republic. That's why I wrote the story that way. Because I don't want people to say, I don't want to say this happened and Hillary Clinton, this happened and Mitch McConnell. You can read it and you can probably see, Mitch McConnell will stand out when you read Cato. But Cato is not Mitch McConnell. What Cato shows is really sort of short-sighted obstructionism decorated as principle. And Mitch McConnell's quite good at that, or was quite good at that. But what Cato also shows is somebody who is doing that not for cynical reasons. I think Cato truly believed he was trying to do something productive, but he also fundamentally didn't trust that the Republic would actually function the way it's supposed to unless you did things to cut corners. And so telling the story that way gives us lots of ways to think in a more complicated fashion about the things we're experiencing and the things we might experience. Because, we have not had Sulla executing 6,000 Romans while the Senate listens to them tortured to death. We haven't had that. We could have that. I hope we don't have that. But these possibilities allow us to imagine on a much sort of broader scale and with much greater range what could happen when circumstances unfold here. And so telling the story in a fashion that we might identify with, but understand it is not our future. It is possibly a way our future could go. But Rome is not prescriptive. It is in a sense a descriptive way for us to imagine the consequences of actions we might not be able to fully sketch out because they haven't happened in the US before.
Yeah, but you can't look into a mirror that you don't look into. So, your book is not being widely read in Congress. It's hard to imagine Mitch McConnell having a seminar with Lindsey Graham and reading your book and saying, how can we avoid the mistakes that they made in Rome? Or AOC and Chuck Schumer doing the same. So we don't look in this mirror anymore. We did for a very, very, very long time. You do because you're in a specialty field. The American people don't do that, and the politicians certainly don't do that. So how do we avoid these mistakes that are clear and present? They echo, they're not rhymes, but they echo. How do we avoid that if we don't bother to look in the mirror of this history?
So I will say, just parenthetically, I wrote a piece about the Emperor Didius Julianus, who made compromises with every single person you could think of to become emperor, and I wrote it in the context of Kevin McCarthy. And one of my former students was a staffer for Kevin McCarthy and said they did read it. And the headline was, "Can Kevin McCarthy outlast a Roman emperor?" So some of them read it, but I think what I would say to your broader point is, we're citizens of this state, all of us. All of us value this state. All of us have inherited this state and hope to pass it on in a better condition, right? Those same basic ideas that Romans have, we share those ideas. And as citizens, we can push to end that complacency. We can push our leaders to do something different.
How?
Well, that's always been the question. In 2016, when I started writing this, I thought making that point would be enough. And I was heartened by the movement that we saw in the late 2010s of people coming out into the street and saying, enough, like, let's stop this. And it was peaceful, and it was in some ways joyous. And I thought that it was working, right? The 2018 elections were a repudiation of some of the worst of this. 2020 seemed like it was a repudiation. I am less confident now, but I am really heartened, and I'm in a way, as an American, I'm proud to see some of the things that are happening to fight for the rights of every citizen to be protected under law as an owner of the Republic should expect. And it's much more dangerous to do that in 2025 and 2026 than it was in 2018, but people are still doing it. I think I'm not as optimistic as I was 10 years ago.
Let me ask you two related questions. One, as a classicist, so you know this story as well as anybody.
Yeah.
When you look at this story and then us, what's your optimism or pessimism level about our future? As a historian, as someone who's looking through this mirror.
I think the optimism is, nobody, we just saw, right? Nobody has any illusions that we are in real danger here.
That we're what?
In real danger here. That we are really running the risk of taking something that we all share ownership of and having that taken away from a significant number of citizens. And, who knows if they get it back. I think the fact that everyone in this room feels that we're in a crisis suggests we are in a crisis and people want to do something to fix it. That wanting to do something to fix it, that was something Romans really struggled to mobilize. it was a lot easier for them to mobilize people to fight in the streets so that their political candidate might beat the other political candidate. But nobody was mobilizing to fight for the republic. And so the sort of things that we're seeing, I mean, I don't want to get contemporary political, but the sort of things that we're seeing in the country right now, where people are standing up and saying, I want to fight for this thing we share in common, that is heartening, and it's different. Romans didn't do that because they didn't think they had to.
They took it for granted that it would just hang on.
Yeah.
Okay, that says how you feel as a classicist looking through the lens of these books. One of them is almost 1,000 pages. As a citizen, if you didn't know any of that, just you're like a citizen who lives in San Diego, California, and you look at what's happening, what's your optimism and pessimism level there, or are they identical?
So I had an experience last weekend that I'm still processing. So I live about 2 miles inland, and I live up on a hill, so I can see the channel between Catalina and and the mainland. And on Saturday and Sunday, a ship, the USS Macon, it's close enough I was able to identify it, which is a literal combat ship that carries F-35s and combat helicopters, was just parked outside. Just parked, I mean, literally, I could watch it from my backyard, and it just stayed there for 2 days while all of this is happening in Minneapolis. I've watched those ships, we've lived there for 10 years. I've watched those ships every day for 10 years. Never once did I wonder what happens if those aircraft turn east instead of west. And I wondered that.
You wondered what?
I wondered that for the first time that weekend.
If these would be turned on.
What happens if that turns east instead of west?
Can you honestly imagine that happening?
Yes.
How many of you can honestly imagine that happening?
And this is where the Roman historian in me gets scared. Because that progression, so the example that comes to mind to me is in 88 BC, the consul Sulla is given a command to go and fight in the Eastern Mediterranean. And his enemies come in and they use basically violence to have a law passed that strips him of that command. Sulla goes out to his army and he says to his army, I have been disrespected and I'm angry about it. March on Rome. And Sulla's officers say, I am not attacking my homeland. I'm not attacking my fellow citizens. This army belongs to Rome. It doesn't belong to you. But Sulla's soldiers said yes, and they marched on Rome. And Sulla took Rome because there's no army there. He takes Rome relatively easily, except once he gets inside, Roman citizens in that moment did stand up. They went on the roofs of the apartment buildings and they took roof tiles, broke those roof tiles and started throwing them at Sulla's soldiers. And what Sulla decided to do was take archers with fire arrows and burn the neighborhood. That provokes a civil war that in 82 BC, so 6 years later, sees Sulla deploy an entire Roman army against the city of Praeneste and use all of the technology that Rome has to besiege and destroy cities, to take that city and then march all of the Italian Roman citizens, not people from the city, but people from Praeneste and surrounding areas, march them out into a field and have archers shoot them all dead. And so that is the most powerful military in the Mediterranean being turned in its full force against Roman citizens. And why? Because Sulla was angry and he felt disrespected. And it started small scale. But as the resistance continued, it ramped up until you are using the full combat power of a Roman army against Roman citizens. And so you are counting on restraint from somebody motivated by emotion, not logic, and somebody motivated by anger and not principle.
Retribution, not commonwealth.
And not retribution because you did something to me so much as retribution because you disrespected me.
So wasn't it the case that for most of the history of the Republic, 509 BC until this time, the army's loyalty was to the state, was to Rome, and not to the general? Obviously, they felt affection and loyalty to the general, but their primary loyalty was to Rome. And suddenly now, these armies are being recruited and rewarded by these successful generals, and their allegiance and their loyalty starts to shift to these power men. Is that fair?
That's fair. But I would say, actually, when we think of what Rome is its citizens. Rome is its people. And so loyalty to Rome means loyalty to the citizens. And loyalty to those citizens means respecting the fact that all of them are equally part of this political entity. All of them are citizens, right? You as a Roman citizen have no right to kill another Roman citizen because you're equally part of the same thing. And you definitely don't have the right to take material and armies and weapons that everyone has paid for to protect the Commonwealth and use it against other people who are basically the co-owners of that state.
All right, let's turn to Julius Caesar for a moment. One of the most fascinating men who ever lived on earth, in my opinion.
Yeah. A
brilliant general from a very distinguished Roman family that was not at its height. A playboy and a wild and crazy guy in all sorts of ways. A brilliant prose stylist, amazing administrator, and yet he's a pivotal figure in all of this. And you said earlier, kind of upsetting the old received tradition that Cicero was for violence as long as it was his kind of violence against his kind of enemies, and Caesar is suggesting comity, forgiveness, reconciliation. Just give us a short analysis of Caesar's pivotal role in this.
So I'll preface this by saying that I am very much on my own little island here. I actually think that Caesar is a very principled figure.
Me too.
But most people don't. And the founding fathers certainly didn't.
Well, just let me interrupt to say there was this famous dinner party that Hamilton and Jefferson were at, and John Adams. And Jefferson's having the dinner party, and on his wall, Hamilton's there, and Jefferson and Hamilton dislike each other rather intensely. and there are the three portraits on the wall: Francis Bacon, Isaac Newton, and John Locke. And this is Jefferson's account of it. He says that at some point during the dinner, Hamilton looked up and said, who are those? Who are those people? And Jefferson was like, are you kidding? That's John Locke, the second treatise on government. That's Isaac Newton, the Principia. That's Francis Bacon, who gave us the scientific method. And there's an awkward silence, and then Hamilton says, in my opinion, Julius Caesar was the greatest man who ever lived. And Jefferson tells this story to prove that Hamilton is just a worthless man. That's their traditional view of Caesar.
Well, Jefferson wouldn't like me much either.
Oh, I think he would.
So what I would say, so the way to tell the story of Caesar very quickly is Caesar is born in the year 100 to a family that has populist leanings, and he is a victim of Sulla. So Caesar is Sulla tries to force Caesar to divorce his wife because Caesar was married to somebody Sulla didn't like. Sulla kills the cousin of Julius Caesar as one of the people he prescribes following his victory. And Caesar's dad's property is confiscated by Sulla.
And you just say prescriptions were these lists that were
put up. Lists of people that Sulla said to kill.
These people have to die.
Citizens, where you'd walk into the marketplace and it would say, I'm going to give you $10,000 if you give me the head of this person.
And so Sulla is angry, and he puts these prescription lists, and now anyone can kill anyone who's on that list. And Caesar is kind of maybe in that list.
Caesar's not on the list yet because he's only 18 when this happens. But he's a victim of this. His family loses its property, and Caesar married the daughter of one of the leaders of the resistance to Sulla, and Sulla wants Caesar to divorce his wife. So Caesar, at a very young age, is forced to resign a priesthood. His political career looks like it's stalled. His family loses its money. He's under intense pressure and has to go into exile because he won't divorce his wife. So his political maturity is, I never want that to happen again, right? I want to fight for the principle of the rights of citizens need to be protected by the republic because that's what a republic does. And the problem that Caesar faces is deep down, he doesn't trust that the republic can do this. And so there's a tension throughout Caesar's life between what he knows to be right and what he's afraid won't apply in his case.
And he knows he's going to have to use force to protect his interests.
He hopes he doesn't.
But he does eventually.
He hopes he doesn't. But in 49 BC, Caesar has become an immensely successful general. He's conquered basically what's now sort of France, Belgium, a lot of Switzerland, and some of Germany. He's a very, very successful general. He's very wealthy, and he's scary to the powers that be in Rome. And they try to force him to give up his military command without guaranteeing that they won't prosecute him for some imagined crime or just kill him. And so Caesar tries to negotiate a bunch of things that ultimately he doesn't accept any of the offers from the people running the republic because he doesn't trust that, even though they'll say nothing will happen to him, he doesn't trust that that's actually
He has
true.
no good options.
His good option is I have the best army in the Roman world,
Right.
and they're intensely
I'm
loyal
not
to me.
disbanding it.
Yeah. So what Caesar ultimately decides is, I really do believe in the Republic, except I don't believe it in my case. I don't believe that it can do what it needs to do to protect me. I trust my army more. But then Caesar is very famous for pardoning everybody. Anybody who asks for clemency, Caesar pardons them. Because again, this principle of citizens shouldn't kill other citizens. So if I can rehabilitate everybody and rebuild the republic, even though these people, tried to kill me and fought a war against me, I will do it. And the problem Caesar has is the last two battles he fights in the Civil War, his armies kill Roman prisoners of war.
They go too far.
They go too far. And the question is, did Caesar know it? So one story, which you think you can accept this or not, is Caesar, he famously was epileptic. And he was having the story is he had an epileptic seizure when the order was given to kill all of the prisoners. Maybe. But what Caesar doesn't understand is when he comes back to Rome, what Caesar says about guaranteeing the lives of every Roman citizen, nobody believes that Caesar actually does it because he hasn't. He thinks it's a one-off exception, but it isn't. And so the assassination is, a total shock to Caesar, because what Caesar felt he was doing was still upholding that principle of the republic and protecting its citizens, and nobody else believed it. Certainly Brutus and Cassius didn't believe it.
All right, so here's a way in which we are not Rome. Pompey has a private army. Crassus has an army. Caesar has an army. We don't have private armies. Now, we have some street thugs, but we don't have private armies that answer solely to a political figure.
Well, so this is an interesting thing that one of my friends who is in the Navy brought up to me. So we've had this conversation off and on. During the government shutdown, when they announced that payment of $1,776, this was not funded by the government. And so my friend wrote to me and said, this is Augustus level stuff.
Augustus is the grandnephew of Caesar.
Augustus's way of solving this problem was to take those armies and effectively say, I am emperor, Augustus is the first emperor, and I will pay for them with my own money.
Now they belong to me.
And my friend wrote to me and said, this is Augustus level stuff. You can't pay soldiers in the United States with private money and still say that this is a public enterprise.
And the founding fathers were aware of this, Ed, and so they developed the Constitution with the following protections. All wars must begin in the House of Representatives. All wars must be paid for by actual appropriations of the House of Representatives. That the president has limited powers as the commander-in-chief. That the civilian authority must always prevail over the military authority. And they also were so concerned about standing armies, which was the bugbear of all this, that they put in the Second Amendment that a militia will be our primary first line of defense, much misunderstood. But they were really appalled by what happened in Rome, and they thought they could put in guarantees in our system that would protect and not to beat up on the current president, but if he's funding some of this with tariff money that doesn't have to go through Congress, he has an independent source of supply for paying these people.
So what my friend said is the money was actually coming from a donor.
From a donor, gee.
I don't know if that's true, but that the money was not coming from government.
All right, I want to go through a couple of these slides.
Yeah.
But you agree that Caesar's pivotal, and his grandnephew's the first.
I agree that Caesar's pivotal, and what I'll also say is what Augustus realizes is there's a fundamental way to promise people the stability and the protection of their rights as citizens, and they will then be willing to exchange the freedom to choose their own leaders. And Augustus makes the promise to all Romans that I can bring back your citizen rights that the Republic could no longer protect, but in return, you have to give me supreme power to do so. And Romans are willing to do it.
So this is a theme that Timothy Snyder's talking about, Anne Applebaum. that in times of great social chaos and rapid change, people look for a stabilizing force and they will trade freedom for stability. And so this is Augustus, who pretends that the republic in some sense still exists, but he's not going to really be a republican.
So here's the interesting thing about Augustus. If you are a citizen of Rome, the republic does still exist. Officially it exists. It actually still exists in 1204 when the state falls to the Crusaders. There's a negotiation where elites go to the Crusaders and say, let's figure this out, right? We are the representatives of the Roman people because the state still belongs to the Roman people. And so what Augustus is able to do, and it's, I think, quite brilliant, actually. I mean, he's a reprehensible figure in many ways, but he's quite brilliant in understanding that all people want are those protections that recognize they are equal stakeholders in this political enterprise. And if he can provide them with those protections, people will go along with it and they will still let him call it a republic.
Right. All right, so we just need to do a couple of things. I want to read a passage from your book, but I wanted us to take a look at a couple of these. So, okay, so just quickly, the difference between the founding fathers were not interested in Athenian democracy. They didn't know a great deal about it, but their model was the template of Rome. So explain this.
So what you see on the left is where the Athenian democracy met. Every citizen would gather there, and every citizen would vote, and their votes would be counted equally by a show of hands. And so this space is massive because it had to fit every male Athenian citizen when they came to vote on legislation.
So thousands of male citizens.
Yeah, I mean, it's estimated probably 13 to 15,000 people would turn up in that space. And we actually have a text that says they had to stop. We know they raised hands because we have a text that says they had to delay a vote because it got dark and they couldn't count hands. So we know for sure this is how Athenian democracy works. What the Roman Republic does is something very different. It isn't one citizen, one vote. It's citizens elect representatives who make laws. And also, it's not equal. Like people in the city of Rome, their vote matters less than people not in the city of Rome because there's so many of them, and they're held in 4 voting tribes. There's 35 voting tribes in total. So if you are from the countryside and you come into Rome to vote, your vote is going to count way more than somebody in the city of Rome. But your representatives, in theory, are supposed to reflect the voice of everybody who voted for them. Not just the people who said yes to them, but everybody.
So this is Cincinnatus.
This is George Washington, the American
statue
Cincinnatus.
In the Virginia State House. And these are the fasces, which is the Roman symbol of strength. You can break a broomstick, but you can't break a series of them. And there are 13 here for the 13 states. And he's not in a toga, as many wanted. He's in American dress. It's one of the most fabulous statues in America, in my opinion. And here he is as Cincinnatus again. So quickly remind us why Washington is regarded as the American Cincinnatus.
Because Washington very self-consciously was asked to serve both as the leader of the colonial militia and the Continental Army, and then also as the first president, and then stepped down from both when he could have held power for as long as he wanted to. Because, again, he's acting as a citizen of this new state, but he's also modeling what citizenship means.
The founding fathers are patterning their behavior through Plutarch and Livy and Tacitus, but particularly Plutarch. And so when Washington finished the war, he resigned his commission, very self-consciously, brought it to the Continental Congress and said, I'm done. I'm going home to sit under my vine and my fig tree, from Horace, so very Horatian. And he tries to do that. We wouldn't let him. But when George III, the King of England, heard this, that George Washington, having won the war, resigned his commission, he said, if that's true, he's the greatest man ever. Because normally Napoleon and people like that never resign. Yeah. Caesar didn't resign his commission. Yeah. Washington is uniquely virtuous in that way. And that's the American concept of political virtue.
And this is something that we've talked about in other contexts. The idea of having this core traditions, these set of core traditions that define who we are as a society.
Norms.
Is so important. And those norms tied to people are so important. And I think Washington understood that better maybe than anybody ever.
And now we've learned in the last 20 years that norms are only as strong as the people who are willing to live according to them. Yeah. All right. Now we don't have time for this. I wish we did. I was just in Rome. I just love this. just give us here's the pointer. Give us like a 2-minute guide.
Can I go and
Yeah.
show?
Yeah,
Okay,
of
so
course.
we have a couple slides that are going to show
We're going
both
to do questions right
this
after this.
and then the scene. So this is from the Capitoline Museum. There's a set of 3 temples here. This is the Temple of Saturn, the Temple of Vespasian, and then the Temple of Concord. This is the Arches Timius Severus. This right here is the rostra. So when you hear of these great speeches that people give in the Roman Forum, they give them right there. And then the Roman Senate House is right over there. And this space in the middle is where people would gather to hear these great orations. And then the Forum, of course, stretches down at the very far end. You see the Colosseum. But this is really the symbolic, but also the very real center of sort of political debate and political life in the Roman Republic. And so when we talk about sort of conversations in the Forum, it's real.
And just quickly, at the time of Jefferson, when the Grand Tour was the way that Northern Europeans saw Rome, the soil had silted up to about this level.
Yeah, you can actually see this
Right here.
So this is the temple of Antoninus Pius and Faustina. And you can see that the entryway, this becomes a church. The entryway to the church is all the way up there.
Is up
Right?
here.
So this is the ground level when it's built. Up there is the entryway to the church.
And who made this possible to excavate it down to the level that it is now?
Mussolini.
Mussolini. Not all bad. Well, he did some pretty rough work. But he did
So this
excavate.
was a neighborhood until Mussolini went in. It was actually a neighborhood with taverns and restaurants and apartments, and he took the entire thing out. And so how many of you, when you visited there, felt like you had this really intimate connection to the deep past?
Oh, man.
That was Mussolini's goal. So we actually have reports written by people around Mussolini who say, we need to strip the medieval out because we need to have this connection between the modern fascist glory and the ancient Roman. And that emotional connection is the point of the excavation. When I read that, this is why I got into this. And when I read that, I felt disgusting, right? I was seduced by Mussolini.
Well, you aren't the only one.
No, everybody is. I mean, it worked.
I mean,
I guess it worked.
Hitler admired Mussolini before Hitler became Hitler.
Yeah.
All right, I just want to read one passage from your book, and then we'll take questions, and some of them will be coming in from the stream. This has been great, by the way, but this is the last passage of your book. And so as I said, as I read it, I kept thinking, is he talking about us? Is he talking about us? And I know that you were cautious, really careful about this, because you don't want to squander your credibility by making sloppy connections between things that are not quite the same, right? But here's how you ended your book on page 281, which is probably just the first chapter of this, but that's all right. Rome's republic then died because it was allowed to. Its death was not inevitable. It could have been avoided. Over the course of a century, thousands of average men, talented men, and middling men all willingly undercut the power of the republic to restrict and channel the ambitions of the individual, doing so in the interest of their own short-sighted gains. Every time Cato, this kind of crabby, kind of posturing Republican, every time Cato misused a political procedure, or Clodius intimidated a political opponent, or a Roman citizen took a bribe in exchange for his vote, they wounded the Republic. And the wounds festered whenever ordinary Romans either supported or refused to condemn men who took such action. Sulla, Marius, Caesar, and Augustus all inflicted mighty blows on the Republic, but its death was caused as much by the thousands of small injuries inflicted by Romans who did not think it could ever really die. You hearing this? When citizens take the health and durability of their republic for granted, that republic is at risk. This was as true in 133 BCE, or 82 BCE, or 44 BCE, as it is in CE 2018. So you write this last passage of your book. I'm guessing in ancient Rome and in the modern world, a republic is a thing to be cherished, protected, and respected. If it falls, an uncertain, dangerous, and destructive future lies on the other side. That deserves your applause. That is an amazing,
Thank you, everyone.
amazing passage. I mean, you could not have spoken to the present moment with more carefulness
Thank you.
How did you write that sentence? Rome's republic then died because it was allowed to. That's a brave, big sentence.
It was.
Where were you? Were you in Rome? Were you
I was in Jerusalem.
Jerusalem?
I was in Jerusalem at the time that the capital was recognized as Jerusalem by Trump. And I was watching this unfold, in a city that was also very, it was struggling with Israeli politics. It was struggling with being sort of thrust into this global politics, and nobody knew what to do. Israelis didn't know what to do. My friends who were opposed to what Netanyahu was doing at that moment didn't know what to do. And many of them had already come out and protested, but it didn't feel like it was doing anything, and so they were stopping doing it. And the same thing was happening in the US. It felt like people were recognizing that there was danger, but they didn't know what to do. And at the same time, they were willing to make compromises on their side that they would not allow somebody they disagreed with to make. And so that was the frustration. I do firmly believe in the principle of a republic. I do firmly believe that there's something special in that form of government. And I do firmly believe that the other side is not as good. And we need to do everything we can, and we need to think very constructively about how we can take these steps to preserve what we've been given. And so I felt that very powerfully at that moment.
It must have been an amazing thing sitting and writing. Did you type this out on the laptop?
I was sitting actually in the Israel Institute of Advanced Study, and this is actually extremely personal. But,
let's hear it.
My wife was in California. I was in Jerusalem, and she was calling me saying, "Come home, it's going to explode." And I knew it wouldn't explode. And not because Jerusalem isn't capable of exploding, but because I knew what the climate was like there. People were very angry, very frustrated, but they weren't going to do anything.
And that's the issue. So I just want to congratulate you for two things. Number one, for the absolute brilliance of that passage, because there were many temptations there that you did not follow. And in tonight, you could easily have beaten up on the current president. He has certain Roman emperor-like proclivities, including an arch that he's intending. And you didn't do it. And I think that's so important, don't you, that we talked about this without just making it that sort of a political thing. And frankly, Ed, that's what we try to do with the Vail Symposium, is to talk about things you can't help but know that there's stuff going on.
Yeah.
But we don't want to just dwell there, because that's not the most productive way to get at these questions. So, James, tell us how we're going to do the Q&A.
We're going to transition to Q&A with a great question online that's a perfect segue to the comment you just made. In just a moment, after we handle this question, you raise your hand, and I'll come around. Chris, who many of you know and will remember, is in the back. He'll help with that side of the room. If you're online, please chat your questions in. The microphone will be on. Please speak directly into the microphone. Stand if you're able, and find your question mark as quickly as you can. Here's the segue, Clay, and I'll invite you to share just a snippet of how we're going to handle the program on Thursday in your response. Is it odd that Washington had the virtue of a decent citizen in giving up his power, but not virtuous enough to free those that he enslaved? Has this also set the U.S. up for failure? So
the question is about, is there hypocrisy in Washington's praising him for all of his virtue, and yet he was a slaveholder? It's more complicated than that. He did own slaves. At the end of his life, he was trying to figure out, how are we going to get out from under this thing? And he did free many of his slaves, his enslaved people, at the death of his wife. And he was trying to figure out, his view was, we can't go on this way. We cannot be a republic if we have slaves. And it's different from Roman slavery for all sorts of reasons. And he was working on it. Then, of course, he dies. And so Jefferson is not as good as Washington in this regard. And we're going to talk about this Thursday night. And I do really strongly urge you to come, and strongly urge the people who are streaming to come. I know it's a tough topic. I've been agonizing over this. It's a really tough thing, but I want you to come because it's important. And your coming here, I think, is going to enlighten all of us. And I think it's going to create conversation, and it's not going to be just browbeating or, opinionating. The same sort of discipline is going to be shown on Thursday night, and to the extent that it slips away, I will try to recenter the conversation. But this is, in my opinion, when we talk about America in the future, I don't think we can go on until we begin to wrestle the problem of race in American history to the ground, both with respect to African Americans and indigenous Americans. And so we have to have that conversation, and where better to do it than in a place where it's going to be safe, thoughtful, historically grounded, non-volatile. So I really hope that you will do that. I know that some of you are reluctant, and how many programs can you do in a week and so on, but I'm told there's no snow, so that's great. Great for us. All right, so, but Washington, Washington is an amazing person, and I just want to put this point to you, so you answer the question. So, the Founding Fathers, Washington wasn't born a man of virtue. He became a man of virtue. We call this self-fashioning or formation. And his formation was Plutarch and Livy and Tacitus and Montesquieu. In other words, the Founding Fathers were asking, how can we be a republic? What is a republic? What does a republic have to do to survive? What are the guardrails in a republic? How can we avoid what happened to Rome? And they, as I said about the war powers, they worked hard on it. Yeah. And so Washington had virtue, not just because he was a good guy, but because he was shaping himself in the most famous case of civic virtue in human history, right? And that was central to the founding generation. It is not central to our generation. We don't have, what's our common text about questions like this?
Yeah, so I think what I would say with the Romans is they focus so hard on this intergenerational legacy to the point where, every year there is a festival called the Parentalia where you come together and people put on masks that were taken in wax to replicate the features of somebody who has just died, and the entire family's history sort of shows before you, and you hear what they did and you hear their achievements, and the voice of the past resonates in the present because these people in the present give their bodies to the people of the past to speak to the present.
Out of reverence and caring
out of reverence, but also out of sort of conveying the sense that you have an obligation to those people. And this is true as citizens, and this is true as members of a family. And Romans learned how to behave virtuously because they embodied the virtuous, right? They allowed someone like Hortensia, the woman who goes and speaks before Augustus and says, you're treating women badly. Men and women both spoke her speeches as she spoke them so they could feel the virtue that she's exemplifying by being so courageous and standing before these people who could kill her, right? And this is something we used to do here, not to that degree. I think. I don't know of any US household where you have like wax masks that go back 300 years and great-great-grandpa would come forward and speak to you. But we used to recite the Gettysburg Address. We used to recite the preamble of the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. We used to at least put ourselves in a position to try to understand the words as spoken by these people in the past. And these traditions, I think, help ground that sense of virtue because they convey a kind of common understanding of what it is we as a society ought to do, because we all allow Abraham Lincoln to speak through us at one point. We all think about why he spoke this way. What is the rhythm? What is the word choice? And we let him do it. And so the virtue of the Gettysburg Address is something that we all can at least passively participate in, but we don't do this anymore. And so I think that there are ways back, but we were talking yesterday, one of the ways back is to say, yes, Lincoln is important, but so is the I Have a Dream speech. Speak that too. Understand that as society moves forward, all of our citizens contribute something that creates this present that we all share. So all of those streams are things that we should also vocalize so we can understand all of these different traditions of virtue that make our society function in the good way that it does right now. And we should cherish those things by connecting to them.
And I'm guessing you would say in one sentence that we have an opportunity on the 250th birthday of the United States to voice those traditions which have made us a great people.
Yeah.
And to make sure that we don't forget that this comes out of a very ancient tradition that was especially born here out of the Enlightenment and this obsession with Rome.
Yeah. But this is Rome's success, right? Rome took these texts that other people in other cultures wrote, and they said, yes, this was written by a Greek, and they are not Roman, but Greeks became Romans because they're all citizens now. And so that history becomes a stream that feeds into Roman history.
Is there a question?
Greg, did you have one?
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Clay opened the program asking the audience our opinion. Are we headed down the drain? Is this nation in that much trouble? And there was not a real confident, optimistic response.
Almost none.
And I infer from what you've said that you're in sync with the audience. To a degree, you talked about worrying about certain things. My question, though, even if you want to clarify my inference, is about his second question. If we are headed down the drain, can we get our heads back up at the,
Can we turn
the
this
surface?
around?
Can we climb back out? And I'm asking you because of your deep scholarship about the precedents and the parallels with ancient Rome.
So am I worried? I am worried. Do I think we can come out of it? Yes, I do. Because I think that, am I as confident as I was 10 years ago? No, I'm not. But I do think that people have begun to wake up to the fact that we have something very special here. And it's something very special that we all share, even if we disagree fundamentally about things. And it's worth preserving. And people are taking action that I think is very, it's not like when my family marched in a protest in Encinitas on a sunny day in January in 2017. And really, like, we're walking along the beach, right? Like, what are we risking there? Nothing. That's not what's happening now. People are fighting for this. And that means there's a chance they win. And I think the fact that they're fighting means even if they don't win in the immediate term, there's a real powerful constituency that is going to keep fighting for the things that we collectively have built and restoring them if they are in danger, if they are damaged. That's where my optimism is, right? I mean, I think that the civic kind of passivity that I was, seeing, the sort of cosplaying of protests that I was participating in, that's not what's going on now. And people are fighting in a way that is non-violent, right? We are not doing what Cicero would say is, well, yeah, we disagree with this person and they're dangerous, so we can be violent in just this one case. No. We're not. That is not how we're doing this. We're advocating for the principles of the Republic and this principle of shared ownership of the political enterprise that means we don't have the right to go and use violence against each other. We have to figure this out.
That complacency is just so widespread and profound. I think Jefferson and Thoreau would both say you shouldn't have to wake up, you should stay awake.
Yeah.
Because if you have to wake up, it may not be too late, but it's pretty late in the game.
Question.
I understand that you feel that the United States is patterned in a lot of ways after the Roman Republic and that the Roman Republic fell apart because of complacency, violence, and a change in the concept of virtue. My question is, are there other parallels in history besides Rome where the Roman pattern played out? And if so, do you think that those experiences contribute to your thinking?
I think that I think, yes, you do see in republics, you see moments of crisis where republics are endangered. This is why, for example, the fall of the Roman Republic becomes very, very interesting to 15th century Florentines, because they have a republic, but theirs is much more fragile. Our republic is, I think Rome is a good way for us to think with because our republic is old enough that we can assume, like Cicero once said, that our republic could be immortal. And Florentines in the 15th century who are struggling with this, people like Leonardo Bruni, who are struggling with what does it take for a republic to succeed and what are the things that make a republic long lasting? They're worried because they really do feel their republic is at risk because their republic is young. In the city of Rome, you actually do have a restoration of the Roman Republic in the Middle Ages that ultimately kind of contracts down so that it is effectively kind of not a republic anymore. And this is something Florentines are also aware of. So you do have lots of examples of republics that don't feel as secure as I think even 15 years ago we felt our republic was. So this is where I think Rome is useful for us to think with. Not so much now, because I think the complacency is gone, right? I mean, this room shows the complacency is gone. The question is, what do we do next? But 10 years ago, the complacency was very much there.
You think the complacency is gone now?
I think the way that this room reacted to your question means people are concerned.
This is a special group. I will grant you that. You are a very special group, self-selected people that come to these forums, that read widely, think about things. They see the world partly through books. My own sense is that the mass of Americans are aware that something's not right, and that's about it.
I think the polling shows they're worried, but I think they're worried. I think a lot of people are worried abstractly, but I think that abstraction is becoming more tangible.
Chris, do you have one?
Yes, I do. Can you see what happened in Nazi Germany happening here? And I'm sorry, Clay, that's probably a sloppy comparison, but there are a lot of similarities. You know, leader that wants expansionism, who uses violence, political violence for personal gain, secret police. I mean, many similarities.
I'll answer it in 2 sentences, then you answer it better.
I don't know about better.
I think these are kind of apples and oranges, I think. The trauma of the Great War of World War I and the Versailles Treaty and the economic collapse of Europe and the United States in the 1920s made it possible for Hitler, because the trauma of being German at that time, the Republic never had a chance. The Weimar Republic never really had a chance. That's not their historic tradition. You would say that they're on the other side of Gaul, and that Germany was always an issue in Rome. Augustus finally said, enough already. We're not going to cross the Danube or the Rhine. I think that what happened, I think it's very important for the American people to avoid using the Nazi Hitler trope unless absolutely necessary, because it clouds the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at the Weimar Republic, what actually dooms it is there are extremes on the left and right, and there's a centrist party, and the extremes on the left and right basically work together to have the centrist party fall. And the other thing that I think is different is, I mean, there is a very powerful ideological element to what's going on, you know, in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. I mean, the early 20th century is a place where politics is driven by sort of overarching ideological theories and systems. That's not happening right now.
Including state anti-Semitism and so on.
Yeah, and that's not happening right now. It's not systematic. There's no sort of Marxist text you can turn to. There's no Mein Kampf. I mean, I think that it's a very specific moment in Germany in the early part of the 20th century.
Unique circumstances in some ways.
I think the fact that you do have significant portions of the political establishment trying to collapse the republic
on both ends.
Both on the left and on the right. I think that's a very significant difference between what went on then and what's going on here. And it also is what opens the door for really, really crazy extremism to happen, because there is no middle that is not, there's no middle that's functionally there anymore.
Ed, I interviewed an eminent historian from California, not you, another eminent historian, last week, and he said, what I see on the streets are brown shirts. And I really backed up. But we've reached a point where very serious thinkers are beginning to say, well, we better be really alert to this. I'll bet there are people in this audience who think that some of this is brown shirt activities. And so we are at a really interesting inflection point.
Yeah, I hesitate to go there.
I know.
I really hesitate to go
program.
there. Yeah. I would say from, again, I'll shift it back to Rome where I do feel much more comfortable talking.
Oh, sure.
You do have private force that is used in political violence. But the worst moment of that is in 54 BC when two people running for election basically prevent the equivalent of a Roman presidential election from happening. And the term of the previous consul, which is effectively the Roman president, expires. There is no consul, and they can't hold an election because the violence is so great that it disrupts all of the elections. And the way Rome solves that is something that Augustus learns from. They bring in the general Pompey the Great, and they say to him, "Here's an army, solve it." So they give him state power. And the state power is so overwhelming and intimidating that the private militias retreat, and they retreat out of public life. So this is something where there are solutions to this, but Pompey is working as somebody who's defending the republic. And I think that's the challenge at this moment.
He's such an interesting figure, Pompey.
Yeah.
Even in some ways, even more interesting than Caesar. We're out of time. What I think we should do is take a break, order some pizza. We'll talk through the night.
Sounds good.
So I want to thank the people who are streaming.
Thank you, everybody.
I want to thank you. I want to especially thank Ed Watts.
Ed Watts and Clay Jenkinson.